Being Framed, Douglas Crimp on Elad Lasry at the Kitchen. Elad Lasry remade the kitchen's gallery space for his untitled Presence. Entering through a parabolic arch, you immediately confronted a wall with a long rectangular opening at eye level. Beyond that stood a medium-height wall whose top was scalloped and painted bright green and pink. Lassery has an unfailing sense for hideous colors. Through the scallops, you could catch glimpses of photographs on the back wall. These deliberately clunky framing devices were presaged in the room demarcated by the arched and slotted walls. There, projected directly on the gallery wall, was a looped 16mm film untitled Eggs, Eyes, 2012. The eyes were mechanical cat-eye-shaped slots that opened and shut to reveal and conceal three wooden plinths of varying heights, each one painted a different color. Such plinths have appeared in Lassery's work before, both as pedestals to display still-life objects in his photographs and as props in two of his dance films from 2009 and 2010. With them, Lassery knowingly refers both to Robert Morris's columns of the early 1960s and to the modular stage props used in Doris Humphrey's dances of the 30s. The eye modules in this 2012 film follow upon a sequence in which similarly shaped zebra wood eggs dance on a tabletop. Extending the subject of a number of his previous films, Lassery also staged a short performance on 3 evenings at the Kitchen, using members of the New York City Ballet and American Ballet Theater. Here, too, Lassery deployed multicolored sculptural framing devices, a low mint green wall right in front of the audience, and a brown wall with 2 oval-shaped openings, eggs again, their bottom thirds fitting with removable pink inserts, and a blue wall with a horizontal slit, much like the white wall upstairs in the gallery. These framing devices were manipulated at various intervals by the dancers, who were dressed in bright yellow and blue outfits that looked like a costume designer's version of workers' overalls. You wouldn't really call that what the dancers did choreography. It was instead a series of dance phrases and shifting arm positions, executed repeatedly as in a dance class. There were sustained bourreing on the part of the women, who were on point. The only sound was that of the dancers' feet, especially the staccato of the women's toe shoes. Changing combinations of dancers and steps were punctuated by blackouts. It was a coup on the part of the Kitchen's director, Tim Griffin, to open his second season with a performance that was an extension of, indeed integral to, one-person gallery exhibition. It's not that Lassery is a performance artist. In fact, I think it's fair to call him a pictures artist, a self-conscious après la lettre pictures artist. In the versions of my pictures essay that I wrote for October in 1979, I employed a quotation taken from Henry James's ghost tale, The Jolly Corner. The presence before him was a presence, in order to effect a transition between two parts of the text, and between pictures and performances. I had in mind Jack Goldstein's performances, which, though live, were apprehended through as though mediated. Lassery does something else. Because Untitled Presence 2012 is so brightly lit, the colors of its framing devices so garish, and the dancers so vividly present, you are tricked into thinking you're really watching a dance performance. But a dance never happens, just some pictures, nervous pictures, as Lassery calls them. Lassery's use of dance is unusual in relation to the current art world obsession with the form, for which the Judson Dance Theater is the touchstone, and for which ballet and modern dance are virtual taboos. Lassery's first dance film, entitled 2007, has two stated points of reference: George Balkein's modernist ballet masterpiece Egon, which made in 1975, and Doris Humphrey's book The Art of Making Dances, published posthumously in 1959. In this work, two New York City ballet dancers, both of whom appeared again in last year's Untitled Presents, performed the final minute of the Egon Pas de Deux 7 times. Because that Pas de Deux is perhaps the most famous duet choreographed in the 20th century, it is, or at least it was to me, instantly recognizable in spite of the fact that the film is silent and the dancing is captured in the close-up so tight as to show only fragments of the moving bodies. Lasseter used Humphrey's diagram that mapped the strong and weak points of the stage to determine his camera angles. The 7 shots of dancing are bookended by headshots of the two dancers, silent and relatively still, not unlike Warhol's screen tests from the 60s. Lasseter's Untitled Presents also contained portraits of some of its dancers, in this case photographs hanging in the upstairs gallery. 2 of the female dancers' faces were contained within odd upside-down tear or thought bubble shapes. We got a preview of 2 of the dancers on the billboard that Lasseter made for the High Line last summer. An equally peculiar framing device, a sort of ribbon-shaped object that outlined the face in a circle and the body in a triangle, was pushed around the stage on casters during the performance. Lasseter obsessively frames his presences, but more is at work than these sorts of devices. Along with the all-too-obvious literal frames, Lasseter's pictures are framed by something you can't quite put your finger on. Framed by something you can't quite put your finger on. Something that makes his presences the haunted kind, that James had in mind in his ghost story, and that I had in mind when I quoted him. You can feel it when you look at the appropriated pictures that are headshots of movie and television actors. Sometimes you recognize them. I think one was Juliet Prowse, who among us remembers exactly what the young Prowse looked like? You also feel it when, every now and then, in the performance, the dancers execute a few steps or make gesture that seems like something from a Balakin ballet. It's more ghostly in this case than the final minute of the Egon Pas de Deux, and it perplexes. Should I recognize this phrase, this face? A dance critic, blogging about her displeasure that the performers were uncredited, identified each of them. She seemed less perturbed by the subjects of the appropriated photographs, or, for that matter, the 2 pictures called Dishes and the Judd-like, or is it Artschwager-like, wall relief that was the sole object in the space between the slotted and scalloped walls. I admit that I too was curious about who the dancers were, but no more so than who the actors are, if indeed they are actors. I want to be able to put a name to a face, make a proper identification, hence Judd-like, Artschwager-like, Balakin-like. But what makes Lasseter's Untitled Presents productively irksome is that such an identification won't do the trick. It won't banish the ghosts.